The night shift had just ended. The office was silent, except for the faint hum of flickering fluorescent lights. Rows of empty cubicles stretched out like a maze, the smell of stale coffee still hanging in the air, mixed with that sharp sting of industrial cleaner. And there he was, a janitor, mop in hand, moving slowly, almost like he was invisible. But that night, he wasn't. From the far end of the office, muffled voices broke the silence. One of them sharp, angry, the other trembling, pleading. A woman's voice. The janitor paused. His hands tightened on the mop handle, and for the first time, he stepped closer. What no one in that building knew was that this man, this janitor, wasn't who they thought he was. By day, the company looked flawless. Sterling dynamics. A corporate giant with polished marble floors, tall glass walls, and citrus-scented lobbies that screamed success. Employees rushed through hallways with forced smiles, their footsteps echoing like a constant reminder of pressure. But beneath all that shine, there were cracks. Supervisors barking orders, staff whispering complaints in the break room, too afraid to speak too loud. And one man at the center of it all, Harold Grant, the floor manager, a man who thrived on fear. "Keep up or you're out," he barked one afternoon. Plenty of people would take your job for half the pay. People froze. Nobody argued. They couldn't afford to. And all the while, the janitor kept sweeping, kept mopping, kept quiet. He was known as Jim, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, graying hair, and a slouch that made him blend into the background. No one paid him much attention. To them, he was just part of the furniture. But Jim wasn't his real name, and he wasn't just some janitor. He was Marcus Sterling, the CEO, the owner of the very company these people worked for. And he'd gone undercover to see the truth for himself. What he saw broke him. A receptionist denied a sick day, even when she could barely stand, and in turn forced to run errands on her own dime, her paycheck barely enough to cover food. But what struck him most was Rosa Alvarez. Rosa was a single mom, late 20s, always the first one in, always the last to leave. She worked account processing, buried in paperwork nobody wanted. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. She shared her lunch with a hungry intern, covered shift when others were sick. She never complained, even when exhaustion painted dark circles under her eyes. And Harold, of course Harold, targeted her. "You're behind again, Alvarez. Don't care if your kid's sick. Get it done. You don't like it? The door's that way." Rosa's lips trembled. She lowered her gaze. She had no choice. Her kids depended on her. Marcus clenched his jaw, forced himself to stay silent. Not yet, but then came the breaking point. One evening, Marcus overheard Rosa on the phone in the supply closet. Her voice cracked. "Mama, I don't know how much longer I can do this. The bills, the rent, if they cut my hours again." Her words shattered him. Days later, a disaster hit. A critical report went missing, numbers tampered with. Harold blamed Rosa in front of everyone. "This is on you. Sloppy. Careless. I should fire you right now." The room went dead silent, and for the first time, Marcus spoke up. "Excuse me, but I saw Rosa working late last night. Those numbers weren't haze." Everyone froze. The janitor had spoken. Harold sneered. "Stay in your lane. Mop boy. Nobody asked you." Marcus said nothing, but inside, he was done watching. From that night, he worked double, cleaning by day, investigating by night, watching Harold, following the paper trail. And soon, the truth came out. Harold was stealing, altering invoices, skimming money and pinning the blame on employees too scared to fight back. Rosa wasn't his first victim, just his latest. Marcus collected everything. Copies of reports, quiet testimonies whispered to him when no one else was listening. Until one stormy Friday night, rain crashed against the windows. Thunder rolled, and in the conference room, Harold cornered Rosa again. He shoved papers at her. "Sign this. Take responsibility for the errors, or you're done, and don't expect to work anywhere else after that." Rosa's hands shook. Tears filled her eyes. She was trapped. Then, the door creaked open, and the janitor walked in, his uniform damp from the rain. his eyes cold, his voice steady. "She's not signing anything." Harold smirked. "Oh, look who it is. The cleaner. You think you matter here." Marcus stepped forward, dropped a thick folder on the table. Evidence spilled out across the surface. Every theft, every lie, every false report. And then, with a weight of silence pressing down, Marcus pulled off the janitor's cap, straightened his back, looked Harold dead in the eye. "My name is Marcus Sterling, and I own this company." The room froze. Rosa gasped. Harold's face went pale. The fallout came fast. Harold was dragged out, disgraced. Employees who'd lived in fear finally exhaled. Rosa was promoted, not out of pity, but because she deserved it. And when Marcus addressed the company, he didn't speak like a CEO. He spoke like one of them. Leadership isn't about sitting in an office. It's about understanding what people go through every day. About listening. About respect. I went undercover because I had to see the truth. And I did. But I also saw strength. People like Rosa, who remind us why this company exists in the first place. Applause roared. Some cried. For the first time in a long time, Sterling Dynamics felt alive again. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones we overlook. The janitor sweeping the floors, the worker no one bothers to thank. Behind every face is a story we don't know. And when we learn to see people not for their title, but for their humanity, we discover that true strength is often found in the shadows. But just as peace returned, another shadow appeared. The office was quiet. Everyone had gone home, and only the low hum of the air conditioner filled the halls. Marcus sat alone in his office, staring at the envelope that had been slipped under his door. His fingers brushed the rough paper, his heart beat loud in his ears. He already knew what was inside, but nothing could prepare him for what he read. Confidential reports. Numbers altered. Accounts missing money. But this time, it wasn't Harold's handwriting. And at the bottom, scrawled in thick red ink, a message. Harold wasn't working alone. Marcus leaned back in his chair. His mind raced. If Harold wasn't the only one, then someone else, someone higher, was still out there. The storm wasn't over. It had just begun. The next morning, the office buzzed with new energy. Employees were smiling again. Rosa walked with her head high, and for the first time, people weren't afraid. But Marcus couldn't enjoy it. His eyes kept drifting to the envelope tucked inside his jacket pocket. If there was another traitor, who was it? Days turned into weeks. Marcus quietly observed. Every late report, every missing file, every slip of paper. On the surface, things looked better, but in the shadows, he could feel something wrong. And then, it happened again. Another mistake. Another accident. Except this time, the damage was worse. Thousands of dollars missing from the company's accounts. And once again, the blame landed squarely on Rosa. Marcus couldn't believe it. Not after everything. But someone was setting her up. He walked into the break room one night and caught Rosa sitting at the table, her head in her hands. Tears fell onto the paperwork in front of her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why is this happening again? I didn't do anything." Marcus wanted to tell her everything, about the envelope, about the warning, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. If there was still a mole, exposing his hand too soon could ruin everything. So he told her only this. "Trust me, Rosa. Don't give up. The truth will come out." But Rosa shook her head. "The truth doesn't matter here. They'll believe what they want. People like me, we don't win." Her words cut him deeper than she could ever know. That night, Marcus made a decision. He was going undercover again. Not as a janitor this time, but as something else. Something deeper. He swapped his suit for a delivery man's vest. He carried boxes, pushed trolleys, lingered where nobody paid attention. And what he found made his blood run cold. In the shadows of Sterling Dynamics, someone else was pulling strings. Someone with more power than Harold ever had. A name that Marcus recognized instantly. And when he saw the documents tied to that name, his entire world shifted. Because this time, the betrayal wasn't just about money. It was personal. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet decision to stand beside someone when the world turns against them. Empathy, choosing to feel another's burden, has the power to dismantle cruelty brick by brick. And in the end, it is not authority that defines a leader, but the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The next part of the story would uncover a conspiracy far bigger than Harold's petty thefts. And Marcus was about to find out just how deep the rot inside his own company went. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes of light across Marcus's desk. The envelope lay there, its contents replaying in his mind over and over. Someone else in this company wasn't just corrupt, they were targeting Rosa. He couldn't let it happen again. Rosa arrived that day looking more worn down than ever. Her usually neat hair was tied in a loose bun, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She sat at her cubicle, shoulders hunched, trying to work through a stack of papers that seemed taller than she was. But whispers followed her. "She's sloppy. Did you hear she messed up again? I don't know why she's still here." Marcus watched from a distance, fury burning in his chest. Rosa wasn't failing. She was being set up. That afternoon, during a manager's meeting, the truth started to surface. Marcus, still undercover as a delivery man, was carrying a stack of packages when he overheard two supervisors speaking in hushed tones. "Harold took the fall," one of them muttered. "Good riddance. But we still need someone to pin things on." "Rosa's perfect," the other replied. "She's already on thin ice. Nobody will question it." Marcus froze. The voices were familiar. Too familiar. These weren't strangers or low-level workers. These were Rosa's direct supervisors. People she trusted. People she depended on to protect her. He clenched his jaw. So this was it. Harold wasn't working alone. And the real cruelty wasn't about money. It was about using Rosa as their scapegoat. That night, he found Rosa again in the break room. She sat at the corner table, clutching a photo of her kids. "They're the reason I'm still here," she whispered. "If it weren't for them, I'd walk away. But what would I tell them? That I gave up?" Her voice cracked. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Marcus sat across from her, his disguise still intact, and said softly, "Rosa, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not give up, even when it feels like the whole world is against you." She looked up at him, confused. "Why do you care? You're just a delivery guy." Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her everything. That he wasn't just some nameless worker. That he had the power to change her life. But not yet. Not until he had enough proof to tear down the people who were hurting her. The next week, Marcus dug deeper. He stayed late, searched files, traced signatures. What he discovered was devastating. The supervisors had been shifting blame onto Rosa for months. Every late payment, every error, every missing number, deliberately redirected to her desk. She wasn't just unlucky. She was a target. And now, they were preparing to fire her. The day came. Rosa was called into the glass-walled conference room. From outside, employees pretended to work, but their eyes kept drifting to her. Her supervisors sat across from her, their faces cold. One slid a paper across the table. "This is your termination notice. We can't have mistakes like yours dragging the company down." Rosa's lip trembled. She reached for the paper with shaking hands. For her, this wasn't just a job. It was survival, rent, food, her children's future. But before she could sign, before she could surrender, Marcus walked in. No disguise, no delivery uniform. This time, it was him, the man himself, Marcus Sterling. Every head in the office turned. Rosa's eyes widened in shock. Marcus's voice was steady, but filled with fire. "She's not the problem. You are." He slammed a folder on the table, filled with evidence he'd been collecting for weeks. Altered reports, emails, proof that the supervisors had been using Rosa as their scapegoat. The supervisors went pale. Their excuses stumbled on their tongues, but Marcus didn't let them speak. "You thought no one was watching, but I was." The office went silent. Rosa sat frozen, her eyes glistening. For months, she had carried shame that wasn't hers. And now, the truth was out. The supervisors were removed immediately. Investigations launched. Policies rewritten. Rosa's name was cleared. And then came the moment that broke her. Marcus turned to her, his voice softer now. "Rosa, I've watched you carry this company on your back while others tried to crush you. You've shown more strength, more integrity than most leaders I know. And that's why I want you leading this department." Rosa's hands covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Applause erupted from the office floor. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. The camera lingers on Rosa hugging her children that evening, their smiles brighter than ever. And Marcus, watching from a distance, knowing the battle was worth it. Sometimes injustice doesn't come as a storm. It comes as a slow drip. Small lies, quiet whispers, deliberate sabotage. But the truth always finds a way to the surface. And the people who suffer the most are often the ones who rise the highest when justice is finally served. In every workplace, there are people like Rosa, people who carry more than they should, yet are blamed for what they never did. But resilience is born in the fire of injustice. When truth finally rises, it doesn't just set one person free. It becomes a light for everyone who has been forced to walk in the dark. Late one night, Marcus gets a phone call. A voice on the other end, low and urgent. "You think it's over? Look deeper." Rosa wasn't their only target. The phone call echoed in Marcus's mind long after it ended. "You think it's over? Look deeper." Rosa wasn't their only target. The voice was gone, the line dead, but the words left a chill he couldn't shake. For days, Marcus replayed them over and over. He had saved Rosa. He had pulled her out of the storm. But what if there were others? People suffering in silence, just like her? He decided to dig deeper. The first clue came quietly. A stack of old HR reports, files he had asked for under pretense of reviewing policy. At first, they looked routine. Terminations, warnings, resignations. But as Marcus sifted through the papers, a pattern emerged. Almost all of the employees who had been fired in the past year looked the same on paper. They were single parents, immigrants, older workers nearing retirement, vulnerable people who couldn't fight back. And just like Rosa, they had all been blamed for mistakes that didn't add up. It wasn't random. It was a system. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his hand over his mouth. He felt sick. Rosa hadn't just been unlucky. She was part of a machine designed to weed out people who couldn't defend themselves. And Harold? He was just one gear in that machine. Marcus knew he couldn't take this lightly. If he exposed his wrong, it wouldn't just be about firing a few supervisors. It would shake the company to its core. So, once again, he went undercover. Not as a janitor, not as a delivery man. This time, as one of them. He created a new identity. A mid-level data analyst. Someone who could blend into meetings, shuffle papers, and sit quietly while the real conversations happened. He wore cheap glasses, muted shirts, and carried himself like he had no ambition at all. And it worked. In hushed corners of conference rooms, in private chats that weren't so private, Marcus began to hear things. They're dead weight. Too many sick days. Easier to just push them out. Let them fail. Saves us the trouble of layoffs. It wasn't just Harold's circle. It was bigger. Supervisors, middle managers, even some senior executives. They had built a culture where the vulnerable weren't supported. They were hunted. And then Marcus met Elena. She was 54, a quiet woman with silver streaks in her hair. She worked in the record department, surrounded by endless boxes of files no one else wanted to touch. She kept her head down, avoided conflict, and moved with the tired grace of someone who had given too much of her life to a company that gave nothing back. One evening, Marcus found her sitting alone, massaging her wrists. "Carpal tunnel," she admitted with a weak smile. "I've been filing for 30 years. Doctor says I should rest, but if I slow down..." Her voice trailed off. Marcus didn't need her to finish the sentence. If she slowed down, they'd push her out, just like Rosa, just like the others. He leaned in, his voice soft. "Elena, have you ever felt like they were waiting for you to fail?" Her eyes widened. For the first time, someone had said it out loud. "Yes," she whispered. "Every day." Over the next few weeks, Marcus spoke to more employees. A single father, working double shift because his hours were cut without warning. A young immigrant woman, constantly blamed for communication errors even though her work was spotless. A man nearing retirement, suddenly written up for mistakes he didn't make. The stories piled up. Different faces. Same injustice. The system was clear now. The company wasn't broken by accident. It was working exactly as certain people designed it. Cut costs. Remove anyone who might need flexibility. Exploit the ones who couldn't speak up. Marcus's heart ached with every story. These weren't just employees. They were people, each with lives, families, dreams. And for too long, they had been silenced. The breaking point came when Marcus walked into the cafeteria and found Elena sitting with her termination papers. "They said I've made too many errors," she whispered. "But I never saw the files they say I lost." Her hands trembled as she held the paper. Years of service, reduced to a single sheet. Marcus's stomach turned. He knew exactly what had happened. They had set her up, just like Rosa. This was it. Enough was enough. The very next morning, Marcus called a meeting. Not in the usual glass-wall boardroom, not hidden away from the staff. He called everyone, every department, every worker, into the main hall. Confused murmurs filled the air as employees gathered. Supervisors looked nervous. Executives whispered to each other, wondering what was happening. And then Marcus walked to the front. No disguise, no pretense, just himself. The room went silent. "My name is Marcus Sterling," he began. "And before I say anything else, you need to know something. For months, I've been undercover among you. I've worked as a janitor, a delivery man, an analyst. I've seen things that broke my heart. Things I never imagined were happening inside my own company." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I saw people mistreated, ignored, set up to fail. I saw single mothers fighting to keep their jobs, immigrants working twice as hard for half the recognition, older employees pushed aside as if they were disposable. And I saw the cruelest part of it all, how silence and fear kept everyone from speaking up." He held up a thick folder, the evidence he had gathered. "This stops today." The supervisors who had targeted Rosa shifted uncomfortably. Executives glanced at each other. Pale, Marcus's voice rose, filled with fire. This company was not built on fear. It was built on people. People like Rosa, who stayed late to finish the work others abandoned. People like Elena, who gave 30 years of her life to keep this place running. People like all of you, who show up every day despite the weight you carry. You deserve respect. You deserve dignity. And from this moment on, you will have it. The hall erupted. Applause thundered. Tears streamed down faces. Rosa stood near the front, her hands pressed at her chest, as if her heart couldn't hold the relief. Elena wept openly, her termination notice crumpled in her hands. But Marcus wasn't finished. To those who abused their power, who thought no one was watching, your time is over. There will be accountability. And for everyone else, there will be change. In the days that followed, investigations launched. Policies rewritten. Protections put in place for workers who had once lived in fear. Rosa became the head of her department, guiding with compassion instead of cruelty. Elena's job was restored, her years of service honored at last. The culture began to shift. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. And Marcus? He walked the halls not as a distant CEO, but as a man who had seen the truth. He stopped to listen. He asked questions. He reminded his people that they were more than numbers on a balance sheet. Injustice doesn't always rule. Sometimes it whispers. It creeps through policies, hides in paperwork, disguises itself as efficiency. But behind every statistic is a human being. And when leaders forget that, they fail. True leadership isn't about power. It's about people. And the bravest act a leader can take is to stand with those who have been silenced. Corruption doesn't thrive in systems. It thrives in silence. For too long, good people have been told to keep their heads down, to accept the weight of unfairness. But change begins the moment one voice refuses to be quiet. Humility is not weakness, and empathy is not naive. Together, they are the strongest weapons against injustice and the foundation of true leadership. Late one evening, Marcus receives a second envelope. This time, no numbers. No reports, just a single photograph, a picture of him disguised as a janitor, and written across the bottom in red ink, "We know who you are." Marcus's chest tightened. He had expected resistance. He had expected anger. But this was different. Someone inside Sterling Dynamics was watching him, tracking his every move. The question was, who? The next day, the office hummed with its usual rhythm. Phones rang. Printers whirred. Laughter trickled faintly from the break room. To anyone else, it was just another workday. But to Marcus, the atmosphere felt different. Like every corner had a pair of eyes. He looked at his people, the ones he had fought to protect. Rosa, standing tall in her new leadership role. Elena, finally free from the weight of false accusations. Others, walking lighter now that fear no longer chained them. He couldn't let this shadow undo everything. The first sign came during a staff meeting. Rosa was presenting a new initiative, fair scheduling policies designed to protect single parents and vulnerable workers. It was bold, compassionate, exactly the change Marcus wanted to see. But as she spoke, a senior manager named Victor leaned back in his chair, smirking. "This all sounds nice," Victor drawled, "but it's not realistic. The company doesn't run on feelings. If people can't keep up, maybe they don't belong here." Murmurs rippled through the room. Marcus's jaw clenched. He had heard this tone before, Harold's voice, reborn in someone else. But Victor wasn't careless like Harold. He was clever. He knew how to disguise cruelty as practicality. And when Marcus caught Victor watching him a little too closely, the truth sank in. Victor knew. Over the following weeks, Marcus saw the pattern. Files Rosa needed went missing. Elena was suddenly misquoted in official reports. Promises Marcus had made to employees were quietly reversed in policy memos he hadn't approved. It wasn't incompetence. It was sabotage. And Victor was at the center of it. One evening, Marcus walked through the empty halls and found Rosa at her desk. Her hands trembled as she flipped through a stack of documents. "They are saying my policy draft cost the company money," she whispered. "But these numbers, they're not mine. Someone changed them." Marcus's heart broke. Again, Rosa was a target. Again, she carried blame that wasn't hers. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "You're not crazy. And you're not alone. They are trying to break you because you're changing things they don't want changed." Rosa blinked at him, her voice fragile. "Then why fight? People like Victor, they always win." Marcus swallowed hard. He had no answer she could believe yet. But he made a silent vow. Victor would not win. The turning point came when Marcus received another envelope. Inside was a list of names. Employees who had left the company under suspicious circumstances. Rosa wasn't the first. Elena wasn't the only. This wasn't just about sabotage. It was about a culture of systematic abuse. A cycle that had crushed dozens of lives. Marcus stared at the list, his chest heavy. Each name represented a story, a struggle, a person who had walked into Sterling Dynamics with hope and walked out broken. He couldn't let it continue. The confrontation came sooner than expected. During a quarterly review, Victor presented glowing numbers, painting himself as the architect of Sterling Dynamics' success. But Marcus knew the truth. Those numbers were built on the backs of people Victor had discarded. When Victor finished, Marcus stood slowly. The room stilled. "Interesting," Marcus said evenly, "because the numbers I have tell a very different story." He laid out the files on the table. Termination patterns, altered reports, names, evidence tying every manipulation back to Victor. The room fell silent. Victor's smirk faltered. "You can't prove." Marcus cut him off. "I can, and I have. You've built your career on cruelty, on exploiting those who couldn't fight back. You thought no one was watching. But I was." Gasps echoed through the room. Employees exchanged glances, some shocked, some relieved, some silently cheering. Victor's face turned pale, and for the first time, Marcus saw fear in his eyes. Victor was suspended pending investigation. His allies scattered, their schemes crumbling, but the damage he had done lingered. The policies, the fear, the silence, they wouldn't vanish overnight. And Marcus knew the fight wasn't over, because for every Victor exposed, there were others hiding in the shadows. And if he wanted to truly rebuild Sterling Dynamics, he would need more than authority. He would need resilience, empathy, and people like Rosa by his side. That night, Marcus walked through the halls of his company. He passed Rosa, laughing with her team, a sound he had rarely heard before. He passed Elena, working with a younger colleague, teaching with patience instead of fear. For the first time, Marcus saw what the company could be. Not perfect, not flawless, but human, and that, he realized, was worth every fight. Corruption doesn't end when one villain falls. It hides, it waits, it finds new faces, new excuses, but so does resilience. Every act of empathy, every moment of courage, every refusal to give up, these are the seeds that grow into change. And while cruelty may win battles, it is humanity that wins wars. Another message appears on Marcus's desk. A simple card, one sentence, typed in bold letters. You still don't see the real enemy. His hands tightened on the edge of the desk. He had taken down Harold, exposed Victor, cleared Rosa's name. Yet someone was telling him, warning him, that what he'd faced so far was only the surface. And the weight of those words pressed down like a storm waiting to break. The next morning, the building felt different. Marcus could sense the unease even in the smallest details. Conversations hushed when he passed. Eyes flicked away too quickly. Rosa noticed it too. People are scared, she whispered as they walked through the break room. Not of Victor. Not anymore. It's something bigger. Something we're not seeing. Marcus nodded but stayed silent. He didn't want to burden her with the truth of the message. Not yet. But then, Rosa pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. Someone slipped this under my door last night. It was a list. Names of employees. Some still at Sterling Dynamics, others who had left. Next to each name was a date and a single word, terminated. Marcus's blood ran cold. That afternoon, he pulled old files from storage, dusted boxes stacked with forgotten records. The deeper he dug, the more the pattern emerged. The same names, the same performance failures, the same departments, and all of it led back to one division. Human resources. The irony stung. The very department meant to protect workers had become the engine of their destruction. The next day, Marcus requested a private meeting with the head of HR, a sharp woman named Evelyn. She greeted him with a polished smile that never reached her eyes. You wanted to see me, Mr. Sterling. Marcus studied her carefully. Yes, I've been reviewing past records. I noticed a troubling pattern. A lot of terminations that don't add up. Care to explain? Evelyn tilted her head slightly, as if amused. Terminations are never easy, but every decision we make is based on performance, policy, and the best interest of the company. Marcus's jaw clenched. Funny, because some of these so-called poor performers went on to excel at other companies. Rosa, Elena, and many others were written up for things they never did. Someone was manufacturing reasons to get rid of them. Evelyn's smile faded, her voice low and controlled. Be careful, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes digging too deep uncovers things you can't put back. Her words weren't a denial. They were a warning. The tension only grew from there. Reports began disappearing from Marcus's desk. Meetings were rescheduled without his knowledge. Rosa found her computer access revoked by mistake. Elena received a letter suggesting a promotion offer was being reviewed again. This wasn't random sabotage. This was systemic, organized, and Evelyn was pulling the strings. Late one night, Marcus stayed behind again, determined to find proof. He combed through Evelyn's digital files, encrypted folders hidden beneath harmless-looking names. When he finally cracked one open, his heart sank. Inside were performance reviews, rewritten, falsified, doctored. Employees labeled as difficult, lazy, non-compliant. Some were marked as risk simply because they were single parents, immigrants, or outspoken about unfair treatment. It wasn't about mistakes. It was about control. And Rosa had nearly been one of their casualties. The next morning, Marcus gathered Rosa and Elena into his office. He showed them the files. Rosa's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. So it wasn't just me. It was all of us. They wanted us gone before we could even fight. Elena's voice shook with anger. How many lives did they ruin? How many people walked out of here thinking they were failures? Marcus's chest tightened. Too many. And it stops now. The climax came during a company-wide meeting. Evelyn stood at the podium, speaking smoothly about employee growth and policy accountability. Her words painted a picture of care and professionalism. But Marcus stepped forward, interrupting her mid-sentence. Enough. All eyes turned to him. Rosa and Elena stood just behind, the files clutched in their hands. Marcus's voice was steady, but fire burned beneath it. You talk about growth, Evelyn, about protecting our people. But these documents tell the real story. He held up the files, his voice rising. You've built a system designed not to help employees succeed, but to silence them, discard them, and protect abusers like Victor and Harold. You didn't just let corruption happen, you designed it. Gasps filled the room. Evelyn's mask cracked for the first time. This is outrageous, she snapped. You can't prove. Rosa stepped forward, her voice breaking but strong. You don't have to prove it. We've lived it. The room erupted. Employees who had been silent for years began speaking out, their voices overlapping, their pain spilling into the open. Stories of unfair terminations, false write-ups, intimidation. One by one, they stepped into the light. The weight of truth crashed down on Evelyn. And for the first time, Marcus saw fear in her eyes. Evelyn was removed pending investigation. A task force was launched to rebuild HR from the ground up, this time led by people like Rosa and Elena, people who understood what it meant to be crushed by the system and yet stand again. But Marcus knew this was only another step. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't about one corrupt HR head, one cruel supervisor, one greedy manager. It was about a culture, a disease. And somewhere above Evelyn, above Victor, someone had been pulling the strings all along. Someone Marcus still hadn't seen. That night, he returned to his office, exhausted. On his desk lay another envelope. No photo this time, just a single sentence. You're finally getting close. Marcus had barely slept. The words from the last envelope haunted him. You're finally getting close. Close to what? He had exposed Harold, dismantled Victor, and torn down Evelyn's corrupt HR empire. But something still loomed above it all, something bigger than he could see. The company looked calmer on the surface now. Rosa thrived in her new role, her team finally free from fear. Elena had begun mentoring new hires, helping them grow where she once had been silenced. The office air felt lighter, but Marcus knew better. Calm seas could still hide monsters beneath. The first crack appeared during a quarterly budget review. Marcus flipped through expense reports when he noticed something unusual, vendor contract that didn't make sense. Inflated prices, phantom services, payments made to shell companies with no websites, no offices, no employees. Billions of dollars over the years, quietly drained away. Marcus's chest tightened. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was deliberate. And when he dug deeper, the same name appeared again and again on the contracts. Board approved. That night, Marcus called Rosa and Elena into his office. These aren't just bad contracts, Marcus explained, spreading the papers out. They are siphons. Someone outside the company is bleeding us dry, and our board has been approving it. Rosa's brow furrowed. The same board that let Evelyn run HR unchecked. Elena shook her head in disbelief. So it wasn't just inside corruption. It's tied to the very top. Marcus's voice dropped, heavy with the weight of truth. We're not just fighting bad managers. We're fighting a system built to protect the people who profit from abuse. The more Marcus uncovered, the clearer the picture became. For years, Sterling Dynamics hadn't just been failing its workers. It had been designed to. Unfair terminations weren't accidents. They were cost-saving strategies. Exploitation wasn't oversight. It was policy. Every Rosa, every Elena, every employee who had been discarded wasn't a casualty of mistakes. They were the business model. The breaking point came during a board meeting. Marcus walked into the grand room, its long table polished to a mirror shine. The board members sat in their tailored suits, calm, untouchable. Mr. Sterling, one of them said smoothly, "We've heard concerning rumors that you've been interfering with operations. Surely you understand the importance of stability." Marcus set a thick file on the table, his voice steady but firm. "What you call stability is corruption. I've traced millions in contract approved by this board, payment to companies that don't exist, signed off without question." The board exchanged glances, their faces carefully neutral. "You've done well, Marcus," another member said coldly. "But you're new to this level of the game. Some things are bigger than you. Walk away and no one will get hurt." Marcus's blood boiled. Walk away? After what they had done to Rosa? To Elena? To countless employees crushed under their system? No, he wouldn't walk away. Not now. Not ever. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the company. Workers whispered in hallways. Some were terrified, others hopeful. And for the first time, the employees began to rally together, not just behind Marcus, but behind each other. Rosa organized late-night meetings, gathering workers to share their stories. Elena began documenting years of abuses. The office that had once been silent with fear was now alive with voices. And Marcus knew the board wasn't facing him alone anymore. They were facing everyone. But late that night, Marcus returned to his office to find another envelope. Inside was no threat, no warning, just a single newspaper clipping from years ago. It showed Marcus's father, the man who had founded Sterling Dynamics, shaking hands with one of the very board members Marcus now fought against. And beneath it, a handwritten note. "The enemy has been here from beginning. Corruption doesn't always come from shadows. Sometimes it wears suits, sits at polished tables, and calls itself stability. But no amount of power can erase the truth forever. Real change begins when ordinary people refuse to be silent, when leaders choose courage over comfort, and when empathy becomes stronger than fear. Injustice may begin at the top, but so does responsibility. And the question now is not just who built this system of exploitation, but whether Marcus has the strength to tear down the very foundation his family helped create." The next morning, Marcus walked the halls with new eyes. Every wall, every desk, every corner carried his father's name. Sterling Dynamics. The company wasn't just a business, it was a legacy now poisoned. Rosa found him by the elevators, her expression soft with concern. "You've been quiet since the board meeting," she said gently. Marcus hesitated, then handed her the clipping. Rosa studied it, her brow furrowing. "So your father, he was part of this?" Marcus's voice was low. "Maybe he built it. Maybe he made compromises to grow the company. I don't know. But if he did, then I've been fighting not just strangers, but my own blood." Rosa placed a hand on his arm. "Legacies aren't about the mistakes of the past, Marcus. They're about what you choose to do now." The final confrontation came in the boardroom. The same polished table, the same faces hiding behind master calm. But this time, Marcus didn't come alone. Rosa, Elena, and dozens of employees filled the room, their presence undeniable. One board member leaned back, unimpressed. "Marcus, your father built this company. He understood what it took to survive. Hard choices, sacrifices. You do well to remember that." Marcus's hands tightened on the table. "Don't twist my father's name to justify your greed. If he built a system that destroyed people, then he was wrong. And I won't protect that legacy. I'll rebuild it." Gasps rippled through the room. Another board member sneered. "You'd throw away decades of profit for sentiment? This is business." Marcus stood tall, his voice rising with fire. "No, this is humanity. And if business demands destroying people like Rosa, like Elena, like every worker you discarded, then it's not worth saving." The employees behind him erupted in support. One after another, they stepped forward, sharing their stories, their pain, their resilience. The board, for the first time, found themselves outnumbered, their polished armor pierced by the weight of truth. By the end of the meeting, the decision was clear. Several board members resigned under pressure. Investigations were launched into the contracts. Sterling Dynamics, for the first time in decades, would begin rebuilding from the ground up, this time with its workers at the center. That evening, Marcus walked through the quiet building alone. He stopped at a wall where a portrait of his father hung, proud and imposing. For years, Marcus had looked at that face with admiration. Now, he saw it differently, not as an idol, but as a man, flawed and human. "I don't know if you knew what you were doing," Marcus whispered to the portrait. "But I do, and I won't let your mistakes define us anymore." He turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a closing chapter. The camera lingers on Rosa, laughing with her children outside the office. On Elena, helping a young intern with patient care. On employees smiling in ways they hadn't in years. Sterling Dynamics wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But for the first time, it was becoming something real. Legacies are not chains meant to bind us to the mistakes of the past. They are foundations, and we must choose whether to build high or tear down what is broken. True leadership is not about protecting a name, but about protecting people. And sometimes, the greatest act of honor is not preserving history, but rewriting it. In the end, Marcus discovered that the greatest enemy wasn't Harold, Victor, or even Evelyn. It was silence. It was a belief that profit mattered more than people. But when one man dared confront his own legacy, and when ordinary workers found the courage to raise their voices, a company was reborn. And in that rebirth, we are reminded that no system, no matter how corrupt, is stronger than the human spirit.